Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Laura Gigliotti, for those of you who I haven't met. I'm an Associate Director of Alumni Regional and Affinity Programs here at NYU Stern, based in New York City. And in my role, I have the pleasure of working very closely with our Alumni Regional Committee in London, and they have very graciously helped us put together tonight's program. So a big thank you to them, many of whom are on the line tonight. And before we get started, I just wanted to quickly mention a few housekeeping items. So first off, as you just heard, we are recording tonight's presentation, so it'll be available on our website in case anyone would like to revisit the content at any point. So no worries if you miss one or two things throughout the evening, it will be available to you in the future. And in terms of the format for this evening, the first 30 minutes or so will be remarks by our speaker, Phil, followed by some Q&A, and then we'll head off into our Zoom breakout rooms for the remaining probably 15, 20 minutes or so, where you can chat with fellow alumni, make some new connections, and we definitely encourage you to grab your own cocktail or glass of wine or whatever your preferred beverage is for that portion of the evening. So you can start thinking about that now. And then lastly, we just ask that you kindly stay muted, at least for the first half of tonight's event, and use the chat function if you have any questions for us. So if you have any technical challenges, you can chat me privately. I'm happy to work with you to correct those. And also if you have questions for Phil, which he'll be addressing at the end of the presentation, you can feel free to type those into the chat box to me privately, and I'll be sure to read them aloud at the end of the presentation. Okay, so with that, I will pass things over to one of our alumni volunteers in London, Alex Doty. Alex sits on our London Alumni Regional Committee, and he was very instrumental in putting tonight's event together. So Alex, I'll pass it to you to introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Laura. Good evening, everyone. I am Alex Doty, a 1985 Stern MBA and an active member of the Stern London Alumni Regional Committee. Tonight's speaker is Philip Tilston, a 1992 Stern MBA. Phil is from the UK, where he has had a successful career as a corporate problem solver in a wide variety of companies, serving in the role of managing director and finance director. He is the author of Creative Thinking and Problem Solving for Business, a magician's approach. You see, Phil is also a renowned magician, and tonight he will use some of these skills to tell us how to think outside the box, how to generate new ideas and bring more creativity into our work and personal lives. Thank you, Phil. Over to you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining me. We'll just start with, I'll try and keep this in view as much as I possibly can. And if we think of a child's creativity, when they're young, there's a lot of it, but they go to school and they're taught there's only one way of doing things. Put it up here. You can see it. They get worried very often about possibly looking foolish if they come up with the wrong answer. As we get older, we worry about stepping back from the company norms or accepted wisdom. And it becomes very easy for us to worry about how other people perceive us, particularly in those sorts of environments. And we can actually try and regain a little bit of that product, that creativity as such, by using the right tools and techniques and regain that creativity we had when we were children. So, just trying to stick to me there, a little introduction there. Picasso had a critical or for tonight, a critical quote, which was, "Each child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist when they grow up." So a little bit about me, as Alex said. The interesting bit is I've been performing magician for over 25 years. I've performed a lot. I've created magic tricks. I've been invited to perform in front of 1,000 magicians at the world's largest annual magic convention. So I have a reasonably creative approach on that side. Although before I was a magician, weirdly enough, I was a chartered accountant, which one does not normally associate with an awful lot of creative thinking. I'll admit that. Before doing an MBA over at Stern. Since then, I've had a number of jobs, primarily in finance. I'm managing director. And what I've always noticed is how hard it is to have people that work for me or in the organization actually come up with ideas. Some of that, to be fair, is culture. Some of it may be that they don't necessarily have the right tools. A lot of it is perhaps their thought processes and being worried that they'll look foolish. I was very fortunate in one of my early jobs when I worked for Cadbury Schweppes in the States to know one of the marketing directors quite well, who was way above me in terms of hierarchy. But because I'd worked in internal audit, I'd done a job in internal audit that had brought me into contact with him. And every time I had an idea, I'd take the idea to him. And, you know, as a finance guy at the time, I didn't know if it was a good idea or a bad idea. He was the marketing guy, he'd know. And he was brilliant because he never laughed at them at all. The only thing that worried me in retrospect is that the marketing department had often thought of these ideas, but only 2 or 3 months before I had, which to me was pretty worrying, to be fair. But he was brilliant because he always knew that that particular idea might not be a runner, but the next one might be the one that makes £1 million. And the worst thing he could do was to make me feel foolish and stop bringing the next idea. That really could be the winner. But apart from the environment, there are blocks. And as I outlined with that little string routine, we're taught from a very young age, there's one way to look at things. We're taught the right way. Everything else almost by default is wrong. And although people say they're teaching us to be creative when we're young, as we go through life, it just gets harder and harder. So we're taught there's one way of doing things at school. We get worried when we're in public arenas, either school or later on in work, that we might look foolish by saying something silly. We might want to question what I call conventional wisdom, where something in an organization has been said so many times, everybody believes it to be true, even though it may not actually be based in any fact whatsoever. I mean, an example, I worked somewhere once and they thought a particular product line was the most profitable line that the company had. When you actually started digging into it and just asking some basic questions, all these assumptions were based on, if you like, costings that had been done 5 years ago, had never been updated for things like employee costs and other costs. But it had just always been accepted that particular product line, we always make money on that. Nobody had ever questioned it. And of course, they didn't, as it turned out. But it takes someone to come and actually ask the question. And in many organizations, that can be hard, depending on the culture, because people don't want to hear it. And they will look at you like you're nuts because everybody just believes it to be true. So the hardest thing I find with people that work for me is idea generation. And I want to talk a little bit about that tonight, really. Laura mentioned I've got a book written, and that's got various things and tools in which many of you will be familiar with, such as brainstorming, 6 hats, various techniques. But the idea generation tools, which I want to talk about, will help the ideas that come from those tools to be better. One of my big bugbears on a lot of creativity courses is when they say you have to think outside the box. And I look at this and I go, well, that's fine. What's the box, and how do I think differently to the way I've been thinking for 20, 30 or 40 years? Just telling me to think differently doesn't actually help me at all. It just tells me I'm not doing something right, but it doesn't help. So I want to talk about that as being the crux of the next sort of 15 minutes or so. I'm afraid this is one of those talks where the information alone doesn't help you a lot. It will help you a bit, but it's something where you do have to go away and practice. I'm sorry about that. Laura has a handout that she'll distribute afterwards with some exercises, an extension of some of the exercises that we'll do shortly. There are also a couple, well, maybe one puzzle, one magic trick that I'll show you and explain towards the end of this, partly to see if anyone is still awake, and partly as a homework. It will be your job to go away and put some sort of presentation to those to entertain your friends. So the box. Let's talk about the box a little bit. I hope you can all see that reasonably clearly. Laura's nodding her head. Laura's on mute, but Laura, what would you say that is? If you unmute.
That looks like a 5 of spades to me.
Yes. And you say it looks like a 5 of spades because that's based on your past experiences. You see, this is a 5 of spades. This isn't actually quite a 5 of spades. It's a card with a bunch of holes cut in it. But you're conditioned to think of a 5 of spades because that's what you've always thought of when you see anything that looks remotely like that. I'm not a big fan of lateral thinking problems, but sometimes they can be quite useful. So I'll throw out a question here. Some people will know the answer immediately, some won't. A donkey is tied to a 6-foot long piece of rope. There's a bale of hay 8 feet away. How does the donkey reach the bale of hay without untying or biting through the rope? Some of you will get that quickly, others will struggle. The answer is it walks to the bale of hay. The donkey is tied to the rope. The rope is not tied to anything on the other end. So lateral thinking puzzles I don't like mostly, but some like that are actually quite useful because it helps understand what are the walls of this box that we keep talking about, thinking about the box. And in my mind, what stops you or constrains your thinking is a combination of things like subconscious assumptions that we make, like, everyone that thought the rope was tied to something at the other end, we just assume it. No one said it, just assumed. Logic barriers and sensibleness filters. And those logic barriers and sensibleness filters keep us thinking maybe down one route instead of being able to pull ideas all from different places. So in my mind, if you like, that's what the walls of the box are like. And how do you try and think differently to think outside of that? And the answer actually is sort of like Picasso said, in a sense. how do you think like a child again? And again, by itself, that doesn't really help. It's as good as saying think differently. So I'm going to outline one or two tools which I find that I use, which have come from some training that I did when I was 18, 19, which I never really quite realized at the time the importance of in terms of creative thinking, until I was putting together some training on creative thinking a couple of years back. And then I started thinking, why is it that I seem to come up with ideas or think a little bit different to many other people? And I traced a lot of it back to some of this early training. And the most important training for this creative thinking was all to do with memory and memory techniques. So for people who are not familiar with memory techniques, the way to remember long lists of things or other facts is through visualization of images. But those images, have to be silly, absurd, ridiculous, rude, funny, anything like that, where we actually visualize and see the pictures in our head helps us remember things. So, for example, if I was trying to remember a shopping list of, say, cornflakes, syrup, peas, if I was trying to memorize that using these memory techniques, then, the first thing I would do, and I'd urge you to try and shut your eyes and see the pictures of this, because that's what I would do, at least, and it helps you see the pictures. I'd go to my front door, I'd look out, and it would be raining, but it wouldn't be raining rain. Cornflakes would be falling all around me, and I could hear them landing on the floor. I could hold my hand out and see them landing on my hand in a big pile. Then I'd step out the door on the way to the supermarket. I'd take 3 steps, and then I'd realize that I couldn't pick my feet up very easily at all. It's like I was walking through mud, but actually it's because I'd be walking through syrup. And every time I tried to lift my foot up, the syrup would be pulling it back down. I then look slightly to my right, and I see a path leading to the supermarket. But the path would be green. And the reason it would be green, it would be made of thousands and thousands of peas, all strewn on the ground, like the yellow brick road from The Wizard of Oz, but green peas. And that's the sort of the basic memory technique on how you remember things. Now, where that ties in with thinking outside the box is that automatically you're starting to think without these sort of logic filters or without these sensibleness filters that constrain you going down one path. An extension of that, or another example, is to use the same sort of logic of stupidity, in a sense, to make up silly stories where weird things happen. And the best way to do this is, well, you've got 2 options. One is to go to a random noun generator on Google. And on the handout, I've got a bunch of nouns that you can use to make a story, and all those nouns fit in there somewhere. The alternative, and again, I only realized I was doing this recently to practice, is if you have young children, and some of you will do, and you're on a car journey, this is a brilliant way to practice. You tell silly stories and it keeps the kids occupied for ages. And even better, if you can stop at various parts and let them take over one at a time and then loop it round. So again, I remember telling stories to my kids years and years ago. I remember something vaguely about some chicken nugget that was desperately trying to escape from McDonald's before it ended up in the fat fryer. I remember something again about some sort of hermit that went on some sort of trial, but he didn't know, he came out of the cave, didn't know which way to go, so didn't have a compass. So he threw his shoe up in the air whichever way it landed, pointing, that's the direction he took off. Just crazy, silly stuff. No logic, though. No sensibleness to it. And again, this is information. I'm afraid it's something that you need to do and to try the various techniques. And you'll find that with these techniques, ideas will just sort of pop into your mind when you're thinking about things. And that really is the way to get away from this singular track. Another way of looking at this, or trying to practice, and in a moment, I'll ask Laura to pull up a picture. She'll pull up a picture for about 30 seconds, and then will change to another picture when I ask her to, again for about 30 seconds. And for any of you who've got pencil paper, what I'd like you to do is to look at the picture and just write down as fast as possible whatever comes into your head. It might be what you see, it might be a feeling, it might remind you of a place you were on holiday. It doesn't matter, just whatever comes into your mind, but just keep writing something for that period of time. It'll only be about 30 seconds. It'll either go very quick or it'll seem like an eternity. And then we'll kick on to the second picture, and we'll do the same. So Laura, if you could bring up the first picture for me. And she'll make it full screen. And if you can all see that, hopefully, then go on that and I'll give you about 30 seconds. For those that don't have a pencil and paper, you're on mute, so just shout it out at the screen. No one can hear you. There's no right or wrong. No one's going to count at the end. And Laura, if you could kick on to the next one for me, please. And thank you, Laura. If you want to take that off again. Super. So those are some ways or techniques for you to try and get a skill set which helps you think outside the box. And you do need to practice, I'm afraid. It's just one of those things. It will come to you eventually if you keep practicing. My recommendation is to try and do something like that 5 minutes a day, and in a week I suspect that you'll see some sort of improvement. The practice is little and often, without a doubt. Now, for those of you that are awake, I'll get on to the one of the magic tricks I was talking about. This comes with a little story, but the idea really is that I'll show it to you. I'll explain the technical piece of it in terms of magical technical piece, and with that you'll be able to think about making up your own story or own presentation, and give you one or two ideas around that to help you along the way. I've got to arrow this down a little bit. And Laura, I will be asking you a question shortly. So hopefully, I think you should be able to see a mat here with a bunch of cards on the table. I can see Laura nodding her head on the screen. So for this little story, we've got, for the sake of simplicity, God and the devil playing cards, game of poker, for the souls of the dead. They're playing for 10,000 souls of the town of San Miguel de Toro. And the devil shuffled the cards, and he's dealing out the cards, dealing out 5 cards to God he's got 4. And then God says, well, hang on, he says, I know you're a card cheat. So look, I don't trust you, take some off the top. So he took some cards off the top, put them in the middle. He said, well, you might deal off the bottom. So he took 3 cards off the bottom, put them in the middle. And he said, and I want to cut the cards. And I'm afraid normally I'd have a spectator here, cut the cards. We can't do that quite here. So Laura, I'm going to put my finger down the side of the deck. Could you say stop somewhere for me?
Stop.
Okay, cut the cards there. And we'll just mark there where we cut them. So God looked at his hand and he had a pretty decent hand here. He had 3 6s and 2 kings in poker. It's a pretty good hand. It's a full house. So he's feeling pretty good about winning those souls. He knows the devil's a cheat, but he took the cards out from the top and the bottom and he cut the cards wherever he wanted. The devil picked up his hand. He had an ace, a king, a queen, and a 10 of spades. 1 card off from a royal flush, which would thump the full house. And he said, let's see where you cut to, God, or in this case, Laura. And he said, if you cut 1 card less, you'd have cut the 7 of spades. You cut to this card. If you cut 1 card more, you'd have cut the 8 of diamonds. The devil smiled and raked in his 10,000 souls with a straight flush. So that's the card trick. The little story. The real critical bit to all of this is, how do we get the Jack of Spades? So without going through the rest at the moment, the mechanic is easy. And also for this, on the handout, I've posted I've put a link to a YouTube video in case you forget this, but it is straightforward. The Jack of Spades sits on the top. In fact, and I'll do it face up. So this is what happened. I ran my thumb down the side of the deck and cut the cards, but it works just the same if you cut them. So Jack of Spades is on top. You cut the cards. You mark the cut by turning the card like so. And then you talk about something for a while, which is the idea of the story and turning over the cards, which magicians say give you time misdirection. You then say, well, let's look at where we cut the cards. I marked them here, and you take the card off. But of course, this logically is never where you did cut the cards. It just looks like it when the cards are cut and you mark them. You see, you actually cut the cards here, and all you're doing is placing them on top of that top card. So hopefully that is quite straightforward. Now, the question is, when you're doing this for your friends, what's the best way of being able to do this? Here, of course, for the most of the hand, I had the deck all set up. So the best way to do this is to shuffle the cards, or better still, have the spectator shuffle the cards. Say, show the cards and say, well, these are all mixed, aren't they? And then what I'm doing here is I'm looking for the 4th card down in this instance, which is the 6 of spades. Okay, so they're shuffled. I show that they're all mixed. I know what that 4th card down is, 6 of spades. I then say, well, look, in case you think I'm going to cheat, because people know that if you know what the top card or the bottom card is, sometimes you can do things with that. I'll take a few off the top, and you take 3 cards off the top, and all that does is to put the 6 of spades on top. Take some off the bottom, it doesn't matter at all. And then you get the person to cut. You mark where the cut is, and then you go into your presentation, whatever that may be, and you force or make them choose the 6 of spades. So the homework for you all, first of all, if that's not clear, look at the YouTube video. If it is reasonably clear, then the homework is to try and put some sort of presentation to that. So again, you can have something like a stacked deck, like I did, or you can have the spectator shuffle the deck. You know what the card is going to be. So I know my son, who's performed at a magic bar for a number of years, he used to use this, and he'd have the card like that, and then he'd explain that he'd been playing a lot of poker recently and looking at body language and signs and poker tells. So he'd then get the person to look at the card, which is the 6 of spades, and then he'd go, he'd run through the cards like clubs, spades, diamonds, hearts, club, and he'd go, oh, you twitched a little bit where it said a spade, so I think it's a spade. And the same for the ace through king values. He'd basically go through the whole lot and then narrow it in and go, well, I think maybe 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, you twitched again on the 6, something like that. And then reveal it as yes, it was the 6 of spades that the person had looked at. So there is an idea or two. The second one, this is very quick, is perhaps more of a puzzle in a sense than a magic trick, but it's still quite a neat little one. And you could put a presentation to it. And this is a bit fiddly with UK money because we've now got this plastic money. But if you fold it into an S and you paper clip on both sides of the S, like so, and you can pretend these paper clips are people, if you like, or anything like that. And the Queen, with his picture on the £10 note, she's the head of the Church of England, so she has the power to marry people. These people are in love, and you see that they're linked together. Now, to be fair, oh, there you go. If you snap the £10 quite quickly, then they should come flying off, but they don't necessarily stay within the camera view here. Oh well, you'll see it on the video. So I did it once, so it works. Anyway, those are a couple of little magic tricks for you to play around with. Getting back to perhaps the more serious part of everything. Again, the biggest issue that I've found in my working life has been idea generation from people and getting them to speak up in brainstorming meetings, because they're very often just frightened to, even though you say there's no bad ideas. So please think of using these techniques. I would urge you to practice them, at least for a little bit, and see whether your mind does start to think in slightly different ways after a week or two of just 5, maybe 10 minutes a day, little and often. There are fun ways of practicing this. And please remember again, as Picasso said, each child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist when they grow up. So I hope you've got something useful out of this. Alex did reference a book I'd written. Again, there's a link to that on my on the handout that comes out if you're interested. It's about 70 pages that goes into this in more detail, and a lot of other tools and techniques like brainstorming and how to create the right culture for creative thinking at work. But I hope you're all awake still, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you entertain some friends with those couple of little tricks that I showed you when we can all get together in person again. So, Laura, I think it's back to you now. Thank you for organising it, Laura.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you very much, Phil. That was wonderful. Appreciate all the insights around idea generation and how we can all bring a little more creativity into our work and life. So with that, if anyone has any questions, feel free to post them in the chat and I will read them aloud. I don't think we received any as of yet. But I guess, Phil, one question I have for you, I guess it's more on a personal level, is when did you first become interested in magic? Is this something that you've always been passionate about, or?
No, I came to magic quite late in 25 years ago. I'm a bit older than that now. And although I'd always loved it as a child, I'd never really thought of doing it and always thought it was very difficult and couldn't do it and the rest. I had these magic sets you get when you're a child, but I've since found out that the instructions on those are generally awful. And I had a job at one point where I was working and living away from home during the week and coming home on Friday nights and leaving on Sunday afternoons. And I stopped, of all places, at a motorway service station. And in the bookstore there, they had this pile of books that looked like they fell off the back of a lorry, one of which was Easy to Do Magic Tricks. And my kids were all sort of between the ages of like 5 and 8 at the time. And I thought, well, if I practiced some of these when I was living away from home and I didn't tell the kids, and if I came back one weekend and Dad could do some magic, it wouldn't half impress the kids. And that's how it started. And I tripped over another book shortly afterwards, and I found I enjoyed practicing it. I enjoyed doing it. And eventually I found a magic club where the learning really, really took off.
Very nice. Thanks for that background. I do see we have one question here from Alex. I think he's looking for just a little more clarification on how to use the techniques that you demonstrated in the card tricks for idea generation. Can you maybe go back and, I guess, speak about one of the card tricks you did, Phil, and how you can specifically use that one for idea generation?
Well, in terms of using in terms of coming up with a presentation for the card trick, do you mean?
Alex, I think that's what you mean. Feel free to come off mute and clarify if you'd like.
Hi, Phil.
Hi.
Hi, Laura. So, yeah, I'm just wondering, I think I understand it, but I was wanting to be clear. So you showed the card trick and just having a little difficulty connecting it with the idea of idea generation.
No, that's because it's homework. So you now have the mechanics of how to do a card trick using this thing called a cross-cut force. Your homework is to go away and put some sort of presentation to that. Some story or other presentation. So, yeah, I mean, you might think these are all different people in different places in the world. For example, or their countries, or they're symbolic of days of the year. So there's 52 of them, so each one is a different week of the year, or anything. They could be politicians. You know, you could force the King of Clubs, and Boris Johnson, or is that a sort of? I'm sure somebody enterprising mindset out there will find some connection between playing cards and trumps and Donald.
So is it a sort of a creative challenge
Yes, homework.
Yeah, I get it.
As I said at the beginning, it's one of these talks where there's information there, but I'm afraid just knowing the information. It's like something I did recently. I read a very good book on negotiating skills. Very interesting, fantastic. It doesn't help you negotiate unless you actually start practicing the techniques that are in there. You know, just reading the book doesn't make me a better negotiator. It's the application of it and the practice that does.
Very nice.
And as I said, in the book you referred to that I'd written earlier, it's got more of the sort of tools that everyone's come across, like brainstorming, six hats, things like that.
Yeah.
But again, the less constrained that your thinking is, even as you apply those tools, the more ideas you're going to get being thrown into the pot from them.
Very nice. Thank you, Phil. And I'm looking over the handout that you provided, which I'll share with everyone. And I see there's also some images included and some prompts, writing as many words or thoughts or feelings that come to mind when you see those images, like we did in your other example. So there'll be lots of resources provided to you all in the next day or so. Okay, I don't think we received any other questions that I'm seeing in the chat. So with that, I think we'll all just break briefly, grab a cocktail or a glass of wine. We'll do about 10, 15 minutes of breakout rooms. And I encourage you to just, simply chat informally with the other folks in your room. Maybe share a little bit about your time at Stern, what degree you received at Stern, when you graduated, the type of work you do now. Just anything else you're looking to get out of the London alumni community, so that we can continue to put together compelling events and programs like this one. So with that, I will send you off and we'll bring everyone back together probably in about 10 minutes or so. So thank you all. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Alex. This was a wonderful talk.